Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with the homeowners association. That all changed when Karen moved in across the street and got herself appointed president of the homeowner association board. The first sign of trouble was when she started hassling everyone about minor things like their mailboxes not being regulation size or their grass being half an inch too long. We tried reasoning with her, but Karen don't listen to nobody. The real problem started when I bought myself a brand new electric pickup truck. I was so excited to get it, partly because I just love trucks and partly to piss off my tree hugger neighbor who's always complaining about emissions and climate change. Well, the day after I brought it home, I woke up and my truck was gone from the driveway. I looked up and down the street thinking maybe I parked it somewhere else the night before, but no sign of my shiny new truck anywhere. That's when Karen comes marching over with a smug look on her face. "Good morning," she says in her fake friendly voice. "I see your inappropriate vehicle is no longer cluttering up our streetscape." I was fuming. "What did you do with my truck, Karen?" She thrusts some paperwork in my face. "As president of the homeowner association board, I've exercised my authority to have it towed away. Take a look at Article 12, Section 3 of our homeowner association bylaws. No electric vehicles or hybrids shall be permitted within the community as they detract from the consistent and historic aesthetic we aim to preserve," she quoted. My jaw just about hit the floor. "You gotta be kidding me," I said. "That truck was parked in my own damn driveway on my property." Karen simply shrugged. "Rules are rules. You should have familiarized yourself with them before making such an ostentatious purchase." I wanted to wipe that smug grin right off her face. "Listen here," I said, getting right up close to her. "I don't give a hoot about your fool rules. Give me back my truck or I'm calling the police on you for theft." Well, that sure wiped the smile off her face quick smart. She backed up a few steps. "There's no need for threats," she huffed. "As a reasonable person, I'm willing to make an exception just this once. But don't let me catch you parking that ugly thing on our street again." Then she flounced back across the road to her house, her nose stuck up in the air. I had to take a few deep breaths to stop myself from marching over there and strangling her. As soon as I calmed down, I got straight on the phone to my lawyer. I explained the situation and asked what rights the homeowner association had to take my truck. He confirmed they had zero authority over what vehicles I parked on my own private property. However, he explained they could make rules about parking on shared streets and communal areas within the housing development. Armed with this knowledge, I set about getting sweet revenge on Karen. First, I sent a formal letter to the homeowner association board, calling for an emergency meeting to review the parking regulations. I presented my lawyer's advice and called for the discriminatory ban on electric vehicles to be struck from the bylaws. The other board members agreed it was an overreach and voted to remove the rule, overruling Karen's objections. Her face turned as red as a stop sign, but rules were rules. Step 2 was strategically parking my shiny new truck in every spot on the street I could, just to annoy Karen. My big old electric pickup took up 2 regular parking spaces, and I made sure to plug it into external power points wherever possible, running cables across the sidewalk. Was it petty? Sure. Did I enjoy watching Karen trip over my charging cables and seeing her turn purple with rage every time she spotted my truck? You betcha! The final nail in her coffin was reporting Karen's illegal towing of my vehicle to the police. Thanks to my lawyer's advice, they agreed it was theft and harassment. Karen ended up with a criminal record, a restraining order to stay away from me and my property, and got booted off the homeowner association board. I've got to admit it was real satisfying seeing her stomp off in a huff when the cops escorted her out of our community meeting after that. My truck and I have been living in peace ever since. Karen's house went up for sale last week. Good riddance. So the moral of the story is, don't mess with a man's wheels, electric or not. And know your legal rights when it comes to dealing with nightmare neighbors and overbearing homeowner associations. Karen finally got a taste of her own medicine, and it sure did stick in her craw. The next one is a pro-revenge story. For backstory, this story isn't mine. It's my grandpa's. Since he died before I was born, this has just been one of those family stories that I've heard since I was a little girl. My family has a lot of those, which I may tell if I find the willpower to do so. But it may not be 100% what happened, but the main points where a bully got covered in poop are: My grandpa grew up in rural Iowa. I'm not going to say where exactly, but Iowa is basically all cornfields anyway, so you probably got a mental image in your head already. He was always a stand-up guy, and despite this happening over 70 years ago at this point, you can still hear people speak very highly of the Boy Scout of a man that my grandpa was. I sincerely wish I knew him. At this point, my grandpa was in his junior year of high school, and despite being well loved in his community, he had his bully. Everyone has that one bully. His bully, though, just seemed to be a dick to everyone. Teachers, parents, kids, hell, there was even a small town cop fresh to the force who got bullied at one point, which would probably go under entitled people if I make another post about when I ended up meeting his craphead. No one seemed to stand up to this stupid little high school ER that thought he knew everything. It got to the point where he'd go out of his way to brag about it to people. This did not set right with my grandpa, but he didn't really know how to stand up to him without making things worse when it came to how he was being bullied. But one day, mistakes were made. My grandpa was getting a pop at a gas station with his friends, and this particular gas station had a restaurant attached, since it was a good spot for people to pass through on road trips or for a truck stop. And in the restaurant was the bully laughing loudly with his little weaselly friends. My grandpa listened, just sipping his drink, and heard that they were going to pull a prank on an elderly woman that owned a farmhouse nearby. This woman's house wasn't in town, since her family had built that house long ago and worked the land around it. She was widowed, her children had moved away, and she hired people to help her maintain the place. Despite her age, I've been told that she was still a Spitfire and insisted on doing a lot of the farming herself. The main issue with her health was heavy lifting. Anyway, back to the supposed prank. This woman didn't have indoor plumbing, which meant that she got water from a spigot near her house and that she had an outhouse instead of a normal bathroom that we had today. For those of you that aren't entirely aware of how Iowa farm outhouses work, it's basically a big pit in the ground that someone digs, and then they stick a wooden shack on top of it. The shack then has a seat with a hole in it for a person to relieve themselves in. The bullies were going to wait until the dead of night so that they could tip the outhouse over. My grandpa was furious when he heard this. He had been hired before by her for summer work and knew that she was a strict but kind woman that didn't deserve to be treated like that. Because when your only outhouse is tipped over, and you gotta go, there's no way you're going to be able to lift it, and there's no way to safely crouch next to the hole without falling in. So my grandpa did the right thing and immediately went with his friends to tell the old lady what was being planned. They expected her to be furious when they told her the story, but instead, she sipped her coffee and gave them a chilling smile. Let them, but we'll have a surprise for them. And she let them in on a plan to make sure that things wouldn't go as far as the bullies had planned. That night, my grandpa and his friends, telling their parents that they were at one another's houses to hang out, all gathered at the old woman's house, munching on some cookies and pumpkin bread. My grandpa got the recipe off her, and it's an amazing recipe that my family uses to this day, and waited. At around 11 o'clock, they heard disgusted screams from the direction of the outhouse. You see, the way that the yard was set up was so that there was only one way to get into the yard and still have enough room to take a running start to tip the outhouse over. My grandpa and his friends didn't tip the outhouse over, but they did move it over about 5 feet and lightly covered the now exposed hole in excess corn stalks from the harvest. The screams were from my grandpa's bully being waist-deep in human excrement. The bully's friends were frozen in place by the gate they came in, and the old woman immediately turned on the lights and started yelling that if they didn't get off her property that minute, that she was going to call the police. My grandpa and his friends waited inside and heard the whole thing, laughing when they heard the pitiful cries from the crap pit and the running of feet from the co-conspirators. Wouldn't you know it, he couldn't get out himself, and since he wasn't getting off her property, she called the police. My grandpa and his friends watched from a window as the poop fiend was dragged out of his rancid prison and made to go to the police station to explain just what he was doing. He wasn't an adult, so he wasn't charged, from what I was told. But word got out around school and his last 2 years of high school were absolute shit. No one knew it was Grandpa, and the old lady never told a soul. Thank you, old lady. May you rest in peace, you wonderful woman. The next one is a petty revenge story. I just came home with a cake. It was not the cake I wanted, but the cake I needed. Let me tell you the tale of how this cake came into my possession. I head to the local bakery after a day of failed errands to soothe my evening with sweets. There was a very large line that people seemed to be respecting. I get in line to order my goodies. The woman behind me was very important, you see. There were 4 small groups of people waiting to order ahead of her. When the frazzled bakery worker asked who was next, she blurted out in broken English, "I next, 8-inch orange dream cake." A few of the people in front of my verbalized that she was not next. She starts getting uppity. "My time more important than you time." The bakery worker was a gem. She just went right to the person who was actually next. The important lady had to wait. There was only one of these 8 inches cakes in the case. The impulse struck me. I ordered the 8 inches orange dream cake. Cue hysterics from important lady. She begins swearing and freaking out, telling me it is her cake and she needed it. This was a rare moment where I performed well under pressure. I replied, "My cake more important than you cake." The guy behind her in line started laughing his ass off and praised the outcome. So I come home and begin telling my husband and our roommate what had conspired. I didn't even finish before he said, "Is there an orange cake in that box?" Yes, I brought home orange petty cake. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I live on a cul-de-sac where I rent a back house from my landlords. There's another elderly tenant who lived inside the landlord's house I was very close with that we'll call Good Sir. I have these neighbors next to me, who I had gotten along with for as long as I had lived here before the pandemic. The husband, we'll call him Mr. Chill, especially has been cool with me. My neighbors have 3 cars between them. 2 belong to Mr. Chill and the wife, we'll call her Mrs. Hypocrite, and the other car belongs to their daughter. We'll call her the Hog. When the pandemic hit, Mr. Chill's family, for reasons that didn't make sense to me, suddenly stopped parking their cars in the driveway and would park them all on the curb in front of their house, as well as the Hog taking the spot I usually parked in more so than her parents did. Finally, after a few months of this going on, I see the Hog outside, and I ask her if she wouldn't mind sharing the spot that I used to park at with me, explaining my situation with being overworked and exhausted from my job. She gives me an annoyed look and just responds by saying, "I use it. I realize I'm wasting my time. Tell her never mind, and go inside." Not even 5 minutes later, there is a knock at the door, and it's Good Sir letting me know that the neighbors want to talk with me. Mrs. Hypocrite is standing there all pissed looking, asking me what the problem is. I explain to Mrs. Hypocrite what I said to the Hog, and she apologizes for coming off so angry and says, "You know, street parking is what it is. It's first come, first serve, and we're not parking to try and give anyone a hard time." The conversation goes nowhere, but we end it peacefully. About a week later, I'm parked in my spot for a change, and my girlfriend comes over to visit with our child. It's summertime, and it's hot. Towards the evening, I get a knock on the door, and it's Good Sir. He says the neighbors want to talk, and I see Mr. Chill standing right there, and he just asks if my girlfriend could move her car, because she's got a bunch of curb behind her car, but not enough for another car to fit. Before I can even say anything, Mrs. Hypocrite shows up out of nowhere and goes off saying, "I'm sick of going back and forth about this. She is double parked and there's not enough room for another car to fit. I understand that she's your girlfriend and she's visiting, but I believe that residents should get priority parking first. It looks like you guys are trying to save the parking for yourselves, and I'm not dealing with this anymore. She needs to move her car." I'm in complete shock and have a lot I wanted to say, but I don't, and just go inside to ask my girlfriend to move. She thinks they're hypocrites and moves just because she feels like that's all they have to feel proud of in their lives. The only reason I gave in to them is just so my landlords do not get involved and risk it turning into them not wanting to renew my lease with me, otherwise I would have said something. Funny enough, even though they got pissed at my GF for double parking, the Hog is the queen of doing that on our cul-de-sac without Mrs. Hypocrite telling her anything. Last year in November, Good Sir wasn't doing too well and went into hospice care, eventually passing away, unfortunately. He gave me his car as a gift and a thank you for being family to him. I now had 2 cars, 2 spots, and an idea. Enter, petty malicious compliance. Mrs. Hypocrite said that street parking is first come first serve, and that residents should have priority over the parking. Well then, so be it. I only need to use 1 car, and the other can just stay parked. Since I am a resident, I decided to park whichever car I am not using in the spot that I would normally park at, and swap them out every 2 weeks in rotation. My girlfriend parks where Good Sir used to. The Hog, her boyfriend, and Mrs. Hypocrite have not touched that spot since I started doing this, since one of my 2 cars is always there. As a little bonus too, Mrs. Hypocrite put one of their cars they aren't using back in the driveway, and when there's a party going on and all the parking is taken up, The spot in front of their house is sometimes open, and since, again, I am a resident and the guests have taken all the other spots, well, I guess I do need a spot to park at after all, right? Sorry, Mrs. Hypocrite or the hog. I guess you'll just have to park around the block and take a nice walk to get to your house. I'm only following what you believe the parking rules should be. Rest in peace. Good sir, I miss you every single day. I'll always love you as my own family. The next one is an entitled people story. I lost someone important recently. He was like my second dad. He helped raise me and I knew him my entire life, so when he passed, I've not been handling it too well. Mostly I've just been in a daze during work, not really speaking to anyone. I've recently been doing much better thanks to my best friend, so when I returned to work after being off for the weekend, I was able to talk and joke around with my colleagues again. One particular colleague, who I used to be pretty friendly with, was ignoring me when I said hi to them. After a few attempts, I asked what was wrong. They proceeded to tell me off for not talking to them for the past week, and that they get that I'm grieving, but they have had it so much worse because my dad died when I was 10, and no one can understand the pain I went through, and you need to get over it. He wasn't even related to you, and my personal favorite, you'll never know what grief is like I do. Considering my bio dad, 3 sets of grandparents, mom was adopted, and now recently my second dad have passed away, I found that comment to be a bit shit. I didn't say anything and just walked away. Suffice it to say, we won't be talking as much anymore. The next one is an entitled parent's story. When I, 19 NB, turned 15, I was gifted a stuffed bat by a boy, 15, I was dating at the time. I wasn't allowed to actually date him, so we tried to keep it a secret. After a while, I could tell my mom and stepfather didn't like him. Not for any good reason other than my mother felt he was too poor and smelly. He did smell bad, but it was literally his environment. He himself didn't smell, it was his clothes. She said he wasn't good enough for me, and after he broke down to a school counselor about how he was worried about how depressed I had gotten. So after that phone call, I wasn't allowed to see or talk to him again. I also had my phone manually gone through and wiped by her. She kept it for a week or two, and when I got it back, the only thing left untouched was my gallery. Everything else was deleted. The only things left on my phone were default apps, 3 phone numbers, mom, stepfather, grandma, and that was it. She deleted the music I paid for, all my games, and changed the login for all my social medias. At that moment in my life, she had taken everything from me. My friends, my music, everything I used to cope. Over time, I had to regain her trust, and I would get in trouble if I downloaded absolutely anything without permission, even a dumb game. I found ways around it to talk to my then-boyfriend, like texting him through YouTube back when that was still a thing. I slept with the stuffed bat he had given me every night. I cried into it and held it tight, BC, it was the only thing tangible I had from him. Well, one day, my mom comes down to my room to do the laundry, basement bedroom, and sent me upstairs to watch the kids. This was weird, BC, she never did this, so I knew something was up, but it didn't cross my mind until later that night. I was going to bed and couldn't find my bat. I panicked and searched for it for hours before giving up and crying myself to sleep. The next day, my mom leaves and tells me to take out the trash from the garage. After she left, I opened the trash bag, and who do I find in there? My bat. I named him Baylor. It's not important to the story, but it's important to me. So I set him aside and threw the trash out like normal, then ran to my room with him to clean him and hide him. Sadly, later that day, after my mom returned home, she searched the trash bins, then demanded that I go get the bat. I didn't want to, but I knew I had to, so I did. Along with other things 2 past friends she caused me to have a falling out with had given me, my mom sat me down on the back patio with my stepfather and younger siblings, who were 1, 4, and 7 at the time, to talk about it. They had started a fire in the fire pit and made me throw the things and the bat into the fire. I was sobbing the whole time as I watched Baylor's plastic eyes melt into the pile of melted stuffing and wood sticks. My 4-year-old brother ran up to me as this was happening, and when he saw what was in the fire pit, he panicked. He was barely potty trained and yet knew how much that bat meant to me. He cried with me, and I wish he didn't have to. The entire time this was happening, my mother was making snarky remarks about how much better I must feel and how she was helping me. Yeah, that extra trauma sure helped a lot, Mother. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.